Welcome to the Last Line of Defense. I'm Seth Jones, President of the Defense and the Security Department at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, and I'm joined today by General Joe Votel, the former commander of U.S. Central Command, commander of U.S. Special Operations Command. General Votel, I'm not sure what you haven't done, but there's probably a couple of things. But thanks for joining us today.
Thanks. Good to be with you, Seth. Good to be with you.
All right. Well, lots going on right now, but what if we can start with your assessment of the U.S. and Israeli military operations thus far during Operation Epic Fury? What have been the main targets as you've seen them, to the degree that you can assess sort of battle damage assessment? How are things going?
Yeah. Well, first off, I just, just kind of a broad statement up front. I think it's been a pretty spectacularly effective display of military capability by both those militaries who have apparently been working on this for some time. And certainly, as I think we all know, there was some very specific targeting of the Iranian leadership, not just the Ayatollah, but really the top tier, and really, I think, into the second tier of military and security and intelligence architecture leadership here that has really, I think, been a very significant decapitation of the Iranian military. It hasn't been a total obliteration of the military, but it certainly has been a significant degradation for them in terms of their leadership. In addition, there's obviously been focus on the missile systems, on the Navy, as we've seen, and on a variety of other command and control targets and internal security force targets that I think are designed to really weaken the regime's hold on power and really, make their ability to respond effectively very, very challenged. I think that's kind of what we've seen, at least in the initial days. My observation of just what's happening today, and what I expect to be seeing is that we will continue to really focus on their response capabilities. I think it's very, very important right now to get after those response capabilities to kind of prevent a more widespread employment of Iranian capabilities.
Yeah, one of the things that's interesting is when you look at the struggles that the Russians have had in getting air dominance in Ukraine. We're in year 5. They have failed to get air dominance, certainly over Ukrainian territory. The Israelis managed to do it over about a 4-day period last year to be able to hit most any target, not just with F-35s, but could bring in F-15s and F-16s. Did it surprise you, or what does it say more broadly about U.S. military power, including air power, to get air dominance so quickly over Iran, with, in some cases, some Russian weapon systems there? I mean, some of them have been degraded, but that seems to be quite a feat.
Yeah, I think what it says, I think our Department of Defense and industry has been developing the right capabilities that have given us the ability to get in and establish air superiority this quickly. Certainly with the Israelis doing it, but you can't discount the fact that they're using a lot of American systems, and of course there's a lot of American air power and maritime air power in the region as well. So, I think it's an indication that our capabilities remain at the top edge, and I'm sure adversaries and potential adversaries around the world are certainly paying attention to this right now, how quickly that has been done. Certainly a lot of that legwork has been done by the Israeli Air Force, but I think by extension, I think we can appreciate that the United States can exert that same capability as well.
So just briefly moving over to the Iranians, not surprising that they have used some combination of ballistic and cruise missiles and drones to target U.S. bases and to target Israel. I think that was expected. We saw elements of that last year during the Israeli campaign, and then after U.S. operations as well. Did it surprise you as the Iranians started to go after civilian targets in the Gulf? I mean, they've hit hotels, they've gone after airports. We started to see them now go after some of the oil and gas infrastructure, including in Saudi Arabia. Um, two questions along those lines. One is what would you say Iran's strategy as you read it right now, and kind of what's your view of how that's likely to be received in the Gulf?
Yeah, I was a little surprised by them going after hotels and some of the big airports, and especially the heavy targeting of the Arab Emirates, the United Arab Emirates. I mean, they seem to have absorbed a very significant portion of the Iranian strike. So I was a little bit surprised by that. But on reflection, I think it's important to appreciate when we think about the Iranians. I mean, this is existential to them. It may not be existential to the United States, and I won't speak for Israel and how they view this. They certainly are in the region and are under a constant threat here. But this is existential for the region, and so I think when you think about that, they're lashing out at some of these targets begins to make a little bit more sense. I think it was expected that they would go after kind of the bases where we are where we have headquarters, where we have troops bedded down, where we have aircraft, where we're launching operations from. I think that is to be expected. I did expect that they would go after the oil and natural gas locations as well. I think those are economic targets, obviously, and they're trying to hurt the partners of the United States across the region. But I am a little bit surprised by the civilian stuff, and I do think that still remains very much a concern. I mean, we've seen sim volleys, large numbers of missiles, large number of drones, but we've also seen some episodic stuff. So I think there is a lack of coherence right now with the Iranians in terms of how they're responding. I'm trying to do a missile count here. It seems to me there's still a lot left in the inventory if they can get them out. I mean, we don't know the full extent of the damage that's been done to their launchers and the command and control and all the other stuff that goes with that. But the raw materials are certainly there that could have an impact on the line. I think my personal view is I think the Iranians are not doing themselves favors by going after civilian targets, particularly airports, hotels, civilian locations here. In the end of all this, they're going to have to live. They're going to have to live in the region, and ultimately, that's going to come back to visit them. I think at some particular point.
So I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about the Gulf states' potential reaction as we move forward. The Iranians hitting their civilian infrastructure. Does that make them, for example, more likely to get engaged in offensive operation or allow the U.S. To use some of the basing for offensive operations, not just air defense system? Or does that cause them to do things that they otherwise might not have done with their civilian infrastructure being targeted?
Yeah, I think many of the Gulf states were hoping to be a little bit of bystanders to this, and for I think understandable reasons, they live very close to Iran, so they would bear the brunt of it. But I do think these attacks against the civilian population and civilian infrastructure will likely lead to them responding in some way militarily to what Iran is doing. My great hope is that is integrated with kind of the Israeli U.S. team that is operating right now. I think it's important to do that, and I think down the line it could if necessary. I think it could help with some of our basing requirements as this kind of continues on for days and weeks, as I think the administration has said. So yeah, I think that it highlights the threat that the Iranian regime has posed to the region, and I think they'll be compelled to respond in some way.
So it may not have started off as a coalition war, at least other than the Israelis or and the Americans, but maybe we'll get one over the course of this if we see a little bit more of this activity. I wonder if we could talk, General Votel, about U.S. strategy. There have been some conflicting comments. I think we've heard, though, from some of the military officials, a focus on Iran's nuclear program, missile program, and then some of the partner forces. But there have been some statements about regime change and encouragement of the population to rise up against the theocracy in Iran. So I do want to go back to strategy as being a combination of ends ways and means. How do you read the ends here that the U.S. is looking to achieve?
Yeah, I mean, I think the chairman and the Secretary of Defense tried to talk about this during the press conference earlier today, and really kind of get us dialed in on the military objectives. That being kind of removing Iran's military capabilities, certainly starting with their nuclear weapons program, the ability to employ that and made it to missiles and use that as a threat to the region, or even beyond the region. And then, of course, their missiles that pose a significant threat to everybody. The Navy and its ability to get out and shut down the Straits of Hormuz or cause problems out there. I think all three of those are linked to long-standing U.S. interests in the region: the counterproliferation, the regional stability, and of course the free flow of commerce and navigation through the region. I think those are all very understandable. Those are all very achievable military missions, and I think we're well on our way to that. And certainly there was some talk about regime change. I think that my read on the situation I'm listening to, there seems to be less focus on that right now and more focus on the military capabilities. So I don't know if that represents maybe some bad messaging across the administration, or maybe some lack of discipline in what we're talking about here. But certainly, kind of getting that link, that police backup, I think is important right now to lay those out, so we can measure ourselves effectively against what we're trying to do. With respect to regime change, I think everyone recognizes that's a political objective. The military really can't achieve that end state. They can do some things that contribute to it, certainly, but that has to be matched to it. We've assembled a lot of resources in the region, so it appears that the means are available here. There are some concerns about munitions, as there always are. We have to think about that. I don't think those problems are defined in terms of something that's going to happen in the next few days, but they certainly could have more of a strategic impact for us as we look at other challenges we want to be prepared for. So I think the military objectives, as we were kind of talked about today by the chairman and the secretary, are achievable with some persistence and continued focus on the military campaign.
Yeah, I do want to talk in a moment about the munitions, including THAAD and Patriot, among others, the munitions for those, just in a moment. But I do want to sort of ask your view about the challenges of expecting the military to be able to influence the outcome of what is happening within the regime right now. When you look at the U.S. Efforts during Operation Desert Storm in 1990 and 91, when you look at the invasion of Iraq in 2003, or even Afghanistan in 2001, there were various boots on the ground, in some cases pretty large ones, in Desert Storm and Iraq. I mean, in this case, there may be small numbers, but nothing certainly like what we saw in the Iraq in the 1991 or 2003. From your perspective, what are the limitations in what the U.S. can do, if any, the U.S. military can do in shaping what the government looks like?
I think it's very, very limited. Certainly, I think, as we've just been discussing, I think the military can do a lot to remove capabilities, to, establish kind of dominance over the areas. We've done with air superiority here, and remove a lot of those. The ability for Iran to lash out and to cause problems across the region. We may be able to have some impact with targeting of internal security force headquarters and leadership here that may impact their ability to kind of crack down on the population as well. So I think we can have our most direct impact certainly against the military capabilities, a little more limited in terms of internal security, and I think even more limited in terms of the choices that may be made in terms of governance. I think it's important to appreciate that Iran does have a process here in terms of how they choose their next leaders, and they've already kind of started that. They've created this three-person council here that consists of kind of a cleric that was close to the Ayatollah, the head of the judiciary, and the current president. And of course, they answer to a assembly of experts. We've all kind of been through that. We kind of understand there is a process there. They've started to do that. The ability of the Quds Force leadership, for example, to step in and interject themselves. I mean, that's a potential. There's not much the military can do to influence that one way or the other than removing the, Quds Force leadership through military means. The ability of a local opposition stepping up. Again, I think we have limited options there. We haven't really heard much discussion of that. I wouldn't dismiss the fact that there may be some elements of our clandestine or low visibility capabilities trying to enable some of the opposition, but it doesn't appear to be a coherent effort or a very coherent opposition at this particular point. So I think what we're likely going to see here, my view is, I think we're going to see some kind of manifestation of a new Ayatollah, new leadership that roughly looks like the last, but certainly impacted by the current situation.
So is it your sense, though, just when the bombing, when the campaign, at least at this level, either stops or at least the pace starts to slow down, and at some point, I think we would expect to see people back out on the streets. I mean, they were protesting at various levels before the bombing began, certainly at the end of last year and early parts of this year. If there is an intense crackdown, if part of what you're saying ends up being the case, so we get a variant of the theocratic regime, revolutionary regime in Iran with slightly different leadership, I suspect at that point, it's not out of the question that we would see a crackdown if there are protests. And then might the military be asked? Is it within the realm of possibility for the military to be asked to conduct action if there's a major bloody crackdown on protesters?
It's certainly within the realm of being asked. It certainly could be asked. I think the likelihood of it is low at this particular point. I don't know that we have the appetite, the national appetite, or the strategic appetite to make that type of commitment. And certainly there's been a lot of discussion about that and the kind of the political discussions in our country. So I think the likelihood is a possibility there. Sure, what the likelihood in my view is relatively low. I think what is more likely is that, if you look at the regime has been weakening over a long period of time. Certainly took a big hit last summer during the 12-day war. It took another hit here in January as a result of the popular uprising of people. And while they suppressed it, the regime was diminished, certainly in the eyes of its own people, and I think that weakened it. They certainly have taken a significant weakening now. Any kind of theocracy that kind of comes in now, I think will be coming in a much lower level. So I think they will be much more vulnerable. They may be more vulnerable to a takeover by the Quds for the IRGC, or they may be more vulnerable to sometime in the future to a more organized and coherent opposition. And if we could, we may play some role in some of that in an indirect way. But I think the likelihood of U.S. forces on the ground is pretty low right now.
Yeah. You mentioned the IRGC, Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, and their paramilitary arm, the Quds Force. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about some combination of the Quds Force and Iranian partners in the region. Some of them we're starting to see a little bit of activity from Lebanese Hezbollah. We haven't seen a lot yet of the Houthis in Yemen or the Shia groups operating in Iraq. What is your sense about how this could evolve further, particularly if we see, as we've seen in the last 2 years, the Houthis become involved in cruise ballistic drone strikes against commercial vessels, against Navy vessels in the region, including the Red Sea, and/or against Israel itself. How does that change the dynamics of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think we always have to be concerned about these the groups. I mean, the Houthis, I think, are one that we have to pay attention. I mean, this has been a pretty adaptable organization right there. Has demonstrated some capability, really, kind of shut down the Bab el Mandeb for the most part for commercial shipping, and caused us to dedicate a lot of resources and a lot of time to, to finally getting them to some kind of cessation of hostilities there. That is held and seems to be holding right now. So, I think we have to be concerned about that group. We have to be concerned about others. I would, right behind that, I would say Lebanese Hezbollah. I mean, there's been a fairly significant beatdown applied to them. From the operations last year, but they're not out. They're still a player although a diminished player, at least militarily, in Lebanon, and we've seen them lash out at Israel, and I suspect there'll be some more of that. But it to this point, I don't want to minimize that, but it hasn't been as significant as we have certainly seen. The Shia militia groups, I think, are without good control and direction from the Quds Force, which is in disarray right now, leadership wise at least. I think are less effective and can be managed by the countries in which they reside, whether that's Iraq or Syria, and I think our relationships with them will be very, very important. I don't see them playing a big role right now. But I do agree we have to pay attention to this. This is, it doesn't take much for these groups to reconstitute themselves, and they only have to get lucky once or twice for us to kind of have to change the approach to them. So, we have to be concerned about, but I don't think they've played a big role. I don't think they're going to play a big role right now, particularly after they've seen what's happened. We'll have to kind of see how that plays out over time.
Yemen would be an interesting evolution, in part because a number of Gulf states, in addition to the U.S. and the Israelis, have conducted various types of operations, even over the last few years, strikes, or in the case of the Emiratis and the Saudis, much more intensive involvement in trying to affect the outcome of the war. So
that's right.
You mentioned this earlier, the industrial base and the munitions. One area that it certainly was a challenge even last year was the U.S. Fired over a quarter of its THAAD missiles in a few days of operations against Iran. Patriots have been used in the region. Patriots have been used in Ukraine. Patriots are critical for the defense of some areas, including Japan in the Indo-Pacific area of operations, on the Korean Peninsula as well. What is your sense about the U.S. ability in at least some of its offensive and defensive munitions, the longer this war lasts? At what point do you think the U.S. starts to feel a little bit of heat in running short of stockpiles, particularly because it needs them in other theaters for its own plans too?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're probably already feeling some of that. I mean, that may not be playing out right now in the Middle East, and we may have stockpiled at least enough interceptors to kind of help weather us through this very difficult period. But I think the bigger issue is it really limits our flexibility for future contingencies and our ability to move to other areas or support other activities. And that's where I think the challenge is. I mean, we've demonstrated the ability, for example, with artillery rounds. We found ourselves way underproducing here at the start of the Ukrainian,
like 155 millimeter rounds, for example.
Yeah. And we've ramped that up, and we're at a certainly a much more accelerated by 2 or 3x, maybe even greater than that. I haven't checked lately, but certainly a significant ramping of it. I mean, I think this should be a very very strong clarion call for us to get to address this munitions stockpile issue we have. Our magazine depth is really, really critical. We can do a lot. We can move ships around and move troops around, but if we can't get them the munitions that are needed to prevail in the type of warfare that we are dealing with right now, we're going to find ourselves on the wrong side of this. So we've got to address that. That's not likely to play out, at least in the immediate term, in what we're seeing in the Middle East. But I certainly think it's limiting our flexibility in other areas and our ability to resupply our partners and get that. It also begs, I think, for more focus on integrated air defense, whether it's in the region or whether it's through kind of the expanded, Golden Dome approach that we're taking here. That we're going to deal with this in the future, and we really need to make sure the resources are put into it, and we've kind of got this. We've got this covered because this seems to be a problem that we are continuing to revisit. It's not a new one; it's been around for a while, but with the resources the Department of Defense is getting or will get in the future, we certainly have to lean on industry and lean on the department to make sure we address this problem.
Well, thanks so much for your time, General Votel. One last question for you, which is, what should folks sort of watch for over the next few days and weeks, sort of indications and warnings that'll give us a sense of sort of where this is headed? Any big takeaways to keep an eye on?
Yeah, I think the one thing I'm watching is what are the Iranians doing? How are the Iranians responding to this? We've seen some of their responses over the last couple of days. I think how they as they begin to absorb this attack and try to get themselves organized, what happens next with them? If they continue to lash out and they continue to launch missiles and drones and target civilian areas and continue to hold a portion of the region at risk, then I think that's going to be an indication of how our campaign is going to move forward from that. So that's kind of the number one thing I am looking for right now, at least in the next few days, to kind of see what that tells us about the direction of our campaign and what that might mean for the length of this. I also think it's important for us to kind of stay engaged on this. We dedicate a lot of resources to it. We're absorbing losses. We're losing service members. We're losing major pieces of equipment in some numbers with this. So I think we have to stay the course here and make sure we see this through to our military objectives.
Well, thanks so much for your time, General Votel. Thanks for all the work you did when you were at CENTCOM and at SOCOM as well. There, in both of those combatant commands. Appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today.
Thanks, Seth. Great to be with you again.
Thanks for listening to our episode today. Please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. For more analysis, please visit csis.org. This is The Last Line of Defense.